Welcome to Earth, a Love Story. I'm your host, Robin Lassiter. This is a special bonus episode, a Podswap episode, where you can listen to Cas Bullis from Cosmic Cowboy Roaming the Weird West interview me. It was really fun to do this interview with Cas. I got to talk about a lot of my experiences, which I haven't done in a while. I talked about the 4 who are one, go deep into addiction and recovery and their relationship to the phenomenon, as well as a bunch of other fun things. We get into the Bridge Collective. It was a wide-ranging conversation. It's all in there. I hope that you enjoyed this conversation from Cas Bullis' podcast, Cosmic Cowboy Roaming the Weird West.
I'm Cas, a holistic practitioner and all-around weirdo. Join me as we explore the ultimate final frontier. Welcome to Cosmic Cowboy Roaming the Weird West. Saddle up, y'all.
Welcome back to Cosmic Cowboy Roaming the Weird West. I'm joined today by Robin Lassiter. I'm so excited. Robin wrote a book that turned into an audiobook, turned into a podcast. Phenomenal book. And yeah, I'm very excited. Like I already said before this, very excited to meet you and to talk to you, and would love to hear more about what it is you do and your journey so far. So yeah, if you just want to give us a little intro.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having me. Thanks for asking me. I wrote a book that I didn't really want to write, and was told that it would kind of bridge these two big parts of my life, and that's exactly what it's done. And the most unexpected and fun part of this is that I get to meet people like you who engage with the book in some way, and then get to have these meetings that are wonderful and connected. So yeah, I also am, have my own podcast. I read my book in the first 15 chapters of my podcast, the first 15 episodes. And so it's basically a free audio book. And then I just started interviewing people that I thought were interesting. And I also do one-on-one coaching. I do past life regressions, a little bit of tarot, stuff like that. So it's a weird life that I didn't think that I was going to end up in, but writing the book has brought me into this entirely new space. So yeah, thanks
That's awesome.
for having me.
Yeah, for sure. The book really resonated with me. Like, I'm just gonna like cliff notes it a little bit, but it was just about like your struggles with addiction and moving through that, sort of guided, I guess. Did you say guided? I guess so, by beings, the 4 who are one. Yeah. And just like I have never struggled with addiction, but like I've struggled with like mental health issues, and very like mirrored journey in terms of coming out of those and into whatever I'm in now, through like engaging with the paranormal. And it's something that like I feel like this sort of field is kind of dominated by men in general. Not that men can't go through this, but like I've noticed men tend to take a very like materialist science view of it, and like, oh, let's examine it and study it and figure out how it works. Whereas women, from what I've seen anyway, tend to like sink into it and engage with it and like become it a little bit, like and it's just been a very interesting thing to witness other people do, because like I felt like I was going crazy for most of the coming out of the mental illness bit, and I mean I did kind of go crazy, I guess, by like the standard definition. And it's just so cool to see that someone else not only went through it but can articulate it in a way that's conveyable to other people. I guess, do you want to like go into kind of like, I don't even know where to start. Like I'm super interested personally in like your experience with the 4 who are one, because I'm very into like channeled works like the 9 and like Seth and Ra, and I would love to hear more about that experience in general.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm very happy to talk about it. I also want to just go back to what you said about women and kind of in this field and in the paranormal and ufology and all of that. I have that experience as well. And I love the men. I really, really do. And I think that it's really important that there are people that are like bridging the the materialist, the science, the like measurable, having academic conversations, having like comparative religion conversations. I love all of that. I have people like that on my podcast. And also, I often think to myself, and I'm working on a way to articulate this right now, that like that women, yeah, we can approach, I'll just speak for myself. Like I approached it in a different way, which was much more storytelling, mythological, like a knowing in my bones and a connection to the earth. And there are lots of people who are engaged with the phenomenon who also have a connection to the feminine, like the lady arrives, or, you know, Fatima appears to people, and there's Marian apparitions. And the goddess, for me, really arrived completely unexpectedly in the middle of all of this. So I could talk about that a lot. So maybe we'll kind of hit on that at some point. But yeah, the four who are one. So that's what I named them. They did not get because I didn't know what to call them. Let's see. I haven't actually thought back through my story in a while. Yeah, the first time that I had an experience with the four who are one, I'd been having sleep paralysis, like quote unquote, you know, that was the closest thing that I could determine that it was sleep paralysis. And absolutely terrifying, just being paralyzed, being fully conscious and awake, feeling a presence, sometimes seeing a presence in the room with me, feeling like I was being, you know, pulled out of my body, and that it, like I would die, like I was dying. It was horrifying, and I would fight and struggle. And I know a lot of people have this experience. And then eventually I couldn't fight anymore, and I would either pass out, which felt really scary because I don't know what happened after that, or sometimes I would find myself kind of standing next to my body, looking down at my body in bed and going like, what the hell's going on? And then there would be a being in the room and take me places. And so I had been dealing with this for months and months and months, and it was exhausting and terrifying. And I did feel like I was going crazy. And one night I was suffering with this and really struggling with it. And after it seemed like hours, this thought entered my head. And I don't recommend this, by the way. Like, this is not prescriptive for anybody. I don't know if this is a good idea or a bad idea, but this thought entered my head that was like, what if I just surrendered to whatever this is? What if I just turned towards this? Like I had kind of learned that there was this trick of turning toward the hard thing, and it sort of magically, there's an alchemy that happened and it transformed. And so I thought, what if I just turn towards this and see what happens? And I, you know, like summoned up all of this courage and surrendered and turned towards it, and instantly was, you know, had this really wild experience where, you know, there's this intense buzzing. It was sound, but it was also light. It consumed everything. It just became my entire reality, completely consumed. And then this kind of clarity came, and I realized that what I was experiencing was kind of the way that I made sense of it was I was sort of hearing every sound on earth at the same time. And I tuned into one of the sounds, and I instantly was in the experience of what was creating that sound, which was this like black jungle cat, this panther that was moving through the leaves, and I was it. And I felt it like completely, you know, one of the most real experiences I've ever had in my life. And then tuned in again to the buzzing, and then was like jettisoned into the cosmos, and into this velvet black void that was very alive, very conscious, very quiet. I was very present. I had like this, some kind of body that was dissolving, and it was scary. It's like, I don't want to, you know, dissolve completely away. And this being arrived and kind of invited me towards this gateway. And some of me, these little, I call them like little champagne bubbles that were dissolving farther and farther apart away, went started to go through this gateway, and I became terrified because I knew in that moment I had again another very clear thought, like, oh, this is where we go when we die. Like on the other side of that gateway is the realm of the dead. And it terrified me, and I pulled back and just like slammed and landed into my body. And I sat up, like adrenaline flushing through my system, like what, this insane experience. And then I immediately, very bizarrely, laid right back down. And as soon as my head hit the pillow, I was in this, I don't know, intense vision or dream. I was standing on the land that I grew up on. And on the horizon line, these 4 huge beings that were kind of made of light, and they were connected. So they were one. So it was 4 sets of shoulders and 4 heads, rose up out of the horizon line, enormous, enormous, and said, "We're here for you when you're ready." And I've actually chills talking about it. I haven't talked about this in a while. And they were that was the first time I met the 4 who were one. The first time that I saw them. And I'm going to pause there because I feel like I've been talking for a long time, but I can go into the addiction piece and where they arrived again if you'd like.
Yeah, I guess like during this experience, like did you conceptualize these beings as like ETs kind of thing, or like deities of some sort, or just like spirits? Like that was where they were for you?
Yeah, I don't think at that time when it happened, I had any conceptualization of it. It was just like I didn't know other people had these experiences. I didn't know the hallmarks of like an out-of-body experience or a near-death experience. So I had the experience, and what happened immediately after is that I called my dad that morning and I told him about it. And he at that time was reading a book about cave paintings and how art originated. And one of the descriptors was this feeling of buzzing and leaving the body. And just that moment of having it affirmed in some way that this is a very human thing and a very like ancient primordial human thing gave me enough of a foundation and context. So I felt like I'm not insane. But beyond that, I don't think I conceptualized them in any way. I mean, to me, they were light at that moment when they rose up, they were light. So it was every time I talk about them, I'm getting chills, which is nice. It took me a long time to put a story together to have a deeper understanding of who they were. And I still don't know. It's just, I found the most functional story for myself. But yeah, they were light, but I don't think I conceptualized it in any way at that point.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, like feel free to continue. I'm just like, yeah, I am so excited about this group of beings because like I said, like I'm very much into like the 9, like absolutely obsessed with the 9 for like a year. And are you familiar with them at all?
Is that the from the Seth material? Or
No, so the 9 were channeled. It had something to do with Andrea Puharich, who turns out has links to the CIA. And also like Gene Roddenberry, like if you've seen Star Trek DS9, like the prophets are based on the 9. So like this group of like Hollywood people got together, like channeled these beings. But this was all going on at the same time that like Seth was being channeled, the raw material was being channeled, like all within the 70s. Like I don't know if it was just massive amounts of LSD that were going around or what it was, but like there was a very distinct time period in which there was a lot of channeling happening, and a lot of like communication with these beings, and then it seemed to kind of peter out. And like now I find the way that people conceptualize channeling is a lot different. Like it's on an individual basis, through social media. Like someone will say like, oh, I'm channeling this, and like do a video on it, whereas before it was more almost like a seance kind of vibe. And like the beings were just like, I find like when people do channelings nowadays, like it's like channeling from their higher self or whatever deity they're focused on. Whereas before it didn't really seem to fit a framework in the sense of like, oh yes, like I can identify this being as this god or this being as like an ET or something. And that's what the 4 Hero one reminded me of and that's why I asked the question of like how you identified them, because like to me, like that is so reminiscent of those channel beings of like they didn't really fit the framework of anything, but they were there. But it also wasn't on like it was on an individual basis for you, obviously, but it just wasn't in the same way that people are channeling now on social media. And so it's I don't know why the shift. I don't know why things were so different. And like to me, your experience is so much different than the like modern channeling experiences that I've heard about, but like very reminiscent of like the Nine and Seth and stuff like that. So it's just I'm so curious about about those experiences because I've never personally had an experience like that. Like I get a lot of like auditory stuff, but not anything to that extent. Like it's like a low level constant in my life as opposed to like these larger events that I experience. But it just gets me excited to hear about other people's experiences like that. So you said they came up again through the process of your addiction or like in your recovery?
Yeah, so thank you for sharing all of that. I don't actually know a lot about channeling, and I didn't because I haven't, there are some people and experiencers and not experiencers who've been into this stuff since like childhood. I didn't know any of it existed. So, and I'm kind of grateful for that because it gave me a pure experience where I wasn't comparing things. But I have heard of people channeling collectives, which this definitely feels like to me as a collective. It's a group. Yeah, so let me think here, because again, it's been a while since I've told this story and remembering the experiences. I think my next experience was, I was living in this very haunted house in the middle of New Mexico in a very bad place, like a very bad relationship, very dangerous and and I was very deep into alcoholism, and I'd always had a problem with alcohol, but it was just so dark there. There was just a darkness there that, the combination of the relationship and the alcohol and this place, this haunted house, was just really brought it out. And so it got worse and worse. The alcoholism got worse and worse. I didn't know what was going on in the house, but I would have like, inside the bedroom in the middle of the night, just this loud knocking on the windowsill next to the bed inside the room, and like the dogs would wake up and go crazy. And there was nothing there. There was the people who had lived there before, I found out later, had a very, very sad and difficult story. And there was the house was just holding that resonance. And what I came to believe is that that the woman who lived there was really angry and sad and kind of stuck. And so I only came to believe that after like this weird group of synchronicities and all of that. So in the meantime, I'm suffering, struggling, drinking a lot, doing really, really dangerous things like drinking and driving, which I'm, of course, very ashamed of, not proud of at all. And it was just I was watching, there was still a part of me that was kind of watching myself going like, wow, you got a 6-pack of beer and almost before the next breath, 1.5 of them are gone. And you're wondering how that happened so quickly. And then by the end of the night, it just got, it's like, well, I may as well get some wine or some whiskey. Like it was bad. It was really, really bad and really dangerous. A lot of blackouts, a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, a lot of wanting to quit, a lot of like waking up. And I don't know, you haven't had the addiction experience, but if anybody who's listening has or is in it, it's just hell. It just was like a hell realm. Couldn't stop. Just suffering. And so, yeah, one night in a blackout drunk, don't remember. Like I remember like 5 o'clock in the evening, and then I remember nothing until this moment where I stepped out of my bedroom it was this old adobe house. It was like 1904, I think it was built, and it had brick floors, and the step out of the bedroom was just a little row of bricks. and I stepped out and I fell. I twisted my ankle and I fell. And as I was falling, it's my only memory from that night, but as I was falling, and it was in this very dark hallway with like these beautiful tin ceilings and it's like very romantic, dark, built-in bookshelves. It was a really beautiful house. And as I fell in this dark hallway, the 4 who are one were there. And again, it was this collective of them. And it was just like that, moment, time slowed down, and this utter like compassionate urgency. They were just sort of holding me as I fell, and they said it was this or something worse. And that's my entire memory of it. And the next memory that I have is waking up the next morning in just, agony, and like turning and getting out of bed and stepping on the floor and realizing that I'd broken my ankle and badly sprained the other one, and then walked around on it all night. And
Oh my goodness.
it was horrible. Yeah, it was definitely my, the lowest, the rock bottom that you hear about in the addiction stuff. Like that was it. So, horrible. And that was the last night that I had a drink. And I feel like this again, I don't know for sure. How can I know for sure? But the story that I've told around this and that makes the most sense to me and feels the most real to me is that they kind of pushed me. They stopped me. They broke my ankle and stopped me before I could, before something horrible happened. It was like, and I really had this sense that they were saving me from karma. They were saving me from hurting someone else or deeply hurting myself. They were like putting a stop to it. And it was so compassionate and loving. And it was utter hell. And even though I never drank, I'm like 7.5 years sober now, and I never had another drink. For the first several months, it was, I was on crutches. I was having withdrawals. I did not reach out to any help. For any help. I was so ashamed. And it was really, really rough. But looking back, that was a moment it was a turning point in the trajectory of my life. Like I could have really racked up some horrific karma if it had gone on much longer. So I'm utterly grateful for it, but it was rough. It was really rough.
Yeah, no kidding. So you said you haven't had any more experiences beyond like when you were coming out of addiction then, like that. It was more of an acute experience, I guess, like with these things then, and now like it sounds like you've kind of gotten pointed in the right direction, so they've stepped back a little bit. Is that what you feel as well, or?
I have had other experience. I've had one more experience that kind of almost even tops that is really wild, that I kind of hid in the book actually, because because I was writing the book real time as the experience happened, and I could not, like, I was not into it. It was not integrated at all. So the chapter of the book that's just journal entries, I report this experience in that chapter, but it's not reported in the same way as these other experiences. And I knew as I was writing that I was like, I'm kind of fighting this experience because I don't know what the hell to do with it. So 2 things. One is that in late 2019, I discovered that in late 2019, I began to have a lot of experiences that felt very ET, alien, bizarre, terrifying. Like that's when I absolutely felt crazy. I'm like, oh, it's aliens now, like all these crazy experiences in my life, and now ETs are showing up. I couldn't admit it. I was, but it was happening. Like it was really, really happening, all these bizarre experiences. And so I reached out to Stuart Davis, who is not, I don't think, doing anything currently with ufology, but he has this brilliant podcast that's still up called Aliens and Artists. And I found it and I was listening to it, and it was just like, I was just going through these ontological shocks as I was listening, like, oh my God, I'm not the only one who's had these experiences, and maybe this is actually real, and maybe this is actually happening, and what do I do? And so he was seeing people like in one-on-one sessions, like I do now, who are having these experiences and not knowing what to do with them. So I did a regression with him, a hypnotic regression, to go into a couple of experiences that I'd had early on, and they showed up there. And also, I just forgot this because I haven't told the story in a while, but before that, before I even knew any of this was happening, I had a between life soul regression with a practitioner named Linda Backman in Boulder, Colorado. And I went during that regression, I went to this planet, like I had a past life. I was a human on this planet. I died. I went through the death process. I was in between lives, and I went to this other planet, and I had a whole experience about why I chose to come here. Who am I? What am I doing here? What is my purpose? And they were there then as well. The 441 were there. And that completely shocked me and really destabilized me for a while. It was like both really affirming and also like, man, like, do I have to call myself a starseed now? Is this what this is? Like, I don't really want to, like, I'm so allergic to the new age stuff, even though I know that there's like, it's truth braided in with watered down like internet. I have kind of a hard time with it, but so I really, really struggled with that. But it was a huge catalyst to have me start exploring this. And then these experiences exploded. And so I went to Stuart for help, and I had been working with him for a little while and kind of accepting, that, okay, maybe this is actually happening. And then I hope it's okay that I'm just like launching into these.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I was feeling, one of the early practices that I started to do was a protection practice, which I had never done, and starting to establish like some agency and saying, like, you can't keep me up all night. You cannot, I can't just be haunted by this all the time. I have to like work and do the dishes, and, this is taking over my life. So I started doing this protection practice. And through that, I started gaining a sense of agency and feeling less afraid. I kind of noticed that the kind of terrifying feeling that somebody was like breathing on the back of my neck went away, and I started being able to sleep more. And so I was feeling more confident and comfortable. And one morning I woke up early. I did the protection practice that I typically do, and I felt the like tugging, the out of body kind of vibration and tugging that I had started to understand, like, oh, when I get this feeling in my body, it means that an experience is going to happen, or I'm going to go out of body or something. And instead of fighting it, I was feeling so much more confident. I was like, well, this is not my first rodeo. I'm going to say yes to this experience. Like I consciously consented and said, yep, okay, I'm going to do this. And when I did, the buzzing vibration overtook me again. I felt myself lift up. And this is the only time that this has happened, but I had the experience of, my eyes were closed. I was kind of laying on my back. I was just in meditation. I felt my body lift up, and that's happened so many times before. But this time I looked down my body and I was like, oh my, like, appears to be that my physical body is levitating. It looked like, the blankets were tented over my body. Hi, kitty. It looked like I was, it looked like I was about 3 feet off the bed, physically levitating. And I was like, well, that's new, it's never happened before. And then in the next instant, I shot up out of my body, up to the corner, up to the ceiling, between the ceiling and the wall. And I could see very clearly like the edge of paint on the, where the ceiling and all the little tiny imperfections. Like I was looking at it so closely. And I thought, and it was funny, and then I shot up again, went through the roof. And then I could see like my house, and then the neighborhood, and then the world, and then, just went out into space. And it felt like I was in space. I could see stars. I could see, it wasn't the same kind of velvety, empty blackness that was full of intelligence that I'd felt before. It felt like I was in space. And so I stopped. And when I did, this was all just awareness and knowing. I don't remember seeing anything, but I had this awareness that they were there, the four who were one were there, and they gave me something. And what they gave me was a line of light and sound. That's the best way I can describe it. It was like this contained frequency of light and sound, and I took it. And um, and then the next moment of consciousness, I was back in bed, but I was like halfway, like I was not how I left bed, which does make me think that I like my body was levitated and then I landed because I was on my side. I was rolled over in a weird way, like the blankets were covering half of my face, and I was really confused and very exhausted. And I I pushed myself up, and I remember like how hard it was to push up my body to a seated position, how hard it was to open my eyes. And I was in my bedroom. You know, it looked like my bedroom. It was very early morning light, so it was like sort of this gray, misty early morning light. And I had these fairy lights that I had behind my bed, and I went and clicked the lights, and nothing happened. And I was like, "Oh, that's so weird. The power must be out." And then I picked up my phone to try to turn on the flashlight on my phone, and that didn't work either. And then I looked around and I was like, holy fucking shit. Like, what is this? It was my bedroom, but it was what I call a honeycomb matrix. So there was this honeycomb uh, hexagons all connected together, and they contained information, and some of them were full, and some of them there was like this kind of square patterns in, and wherever I looked, the matrix would emerge, and then I turned my head and looked this way, and it disappeared over here and it emerged over here. So I was looking around the room looking at this, and it felt honestly sort of cold and sterile and strange. And so it's all happened pretty quickly, but I looked to the left, I looked to the right, and then my bed faces a wall, and then out of the wall, which was misty. It was the same sort of gray mist, not mist, but like, that early morning dawn quality. And the whole wall was that. And out of that wall walked four beings. And they were not in a collective like before. They were separated, but they were like, to me, clearly the four who were one. And they came over to the side of my bed, and they just gave me all this information, just downloaded all this information. I can't remember now whether I at some point I said, am I not in my body? I asked. I can't remember exactly like when in the story that happened. I trust whatever my account is in the book, but so the information that they gave me was that we're giving you a look behind the scenes. And it's almost like they used air quotes, like this is behind the scenes of your reality. And this is what reality hangs on, they said. And reality responds to where you place your attention and the quality of your attention. And it's time to learn to use the operating system of your reality. And I said, am I not in my body? And they were like super fucking annoyed. And I said, I need to get back in my body. And then next instant, I was still sitting up, still, I think I was in my body the whole time. And then, but they were gone. The room was normal. It was a normal day. And I was in full ontological shock and had to like get up and go to work. And it was really, really, really difficult. It was, these things are not easy, it's not going through these, like, now that I'm stabilized and like have context and frameworks and everything and look back and can go, okay, I've done some meaning making around this, but when it happened, it's like, it's the most terrifying thing to watch your reality just be broken open into something that you never could imagine. And so it was hard. It was really hard. I had nobody to talk to about it. My partner at the time, like lovely guy, but didn't, had no, I kind of told him this, and I think he was just like, oh, which I don't blame him. Like, what do you say to these things? So it was really, really hard. But, and then as I was talking, I remember I had one more experience with them that was just very brief, but it was an out of body experience. And this was earlier, where they came down and they said, you have to come higher. We can't go that low. And I like felt this huge intense buzzing in my body. And then I met them, and it was just kind of bliss. And so I think those are all my 401 stories that I remember. But they, I work with that download or that piece of information every day, that reality changes based on the quality of our attention and where we place our attention. And that I'm learning to use the operating system of my reality. And it caused me to enter into this really beautiful Buddhist lineage where I'm understanding reality in a different way. So it was completely life-changing and beautiful and hard. Yeah.
That's really cool. The like, I don't know what your experience with psychedelics is, but I do them semi-regularly. And I've never seen like honeycomb like that, but like perceiving that sort of, like you said, like what reality hangs on. Like I've had moments where I'm like, oh, like what I'm seeing in front of me is not real, and like this behind the curtain sort of thing. Like that's what that is. And it's just, I didn't conceptualize, like you're sharing that experience, like helped me kind of put two and two together of like, oh, okay, that's what I was seeing. Like, because I knew, like part of me knew like that is like the code behind, the reality or whatever, but like not like just that way of like, this is what reality hangs on. That's such a, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah. It is like the skeleton behind everything.
Yeah.
That when you said that they gave you that light and sound thing, like line, like were you able to like perceive what that was, or it was just light and sound to you and that was the sum total of it?
Yeah, I in the experience itself, I was able to perceive that it was just light and sound and like this contained line. I did another regression with Stuart at some point after that, and asked about it specifically, like, what is this? And what I was told was that it was, installed inside my body, and it would make it easier for me to generate my own energy, and also easier for me to travel, meaning go out of body, astral travel, connect with them or these other places. And so I was told that, and in the regression, and then I also got the information that I was going to need to, like, instead of my whole life they had pulled me out of my body. It felt like this, thing that that was happening to me and that I wasn't consenting to. And during this process, they basically said, you need to learn how to do this without us doing it for you. And this line of light and sound will help you do that. And so then what unfolded was just a bunch of experiences that affirmed that. I would have the out of body feelings, but I could feel that they were next to me. They were like the light, the buzzing, the light, the overwhelm wasn't like happening to me. It was here. It was off to my side. They were kind of holding the frequency, and I was like learning to use this muscle of being able to go in and out of body. So, and I did, and it doesn't happen as often now, but it happens regularly enough that that out of body tugging, I call it, it's sort of this strange sensation happens. And if I'm resourced and feel up to it and it doesn't feel scary, then I will do that. And I have the ability to do that now, but it's not something I mess around with or play around with. I think like psychedelics, psychedelics were, I had some profound experiences, but mostly it was like as a party drug when I was in my 20s. And so because of my sobriety, currently it's still part of my sobriety. That may change at some point. But I think that I see all of these things as very similar. Like, what I've learned over lots of trial and error and lots of time is, for me, the most important thing is to be grounded, to be resourced, and then have then I can consent to having the experience, because otherwise it will, having your reality blown on a regular basis without that like opposite pole of really grounded, like safety and respect for the body and respect for this realm, just blew out my nervous system basically. And so, yeah, I see them as very similar, and now I don't do it unless there seems to be a reason for it, and I feel like the rest of my life isn't going to blow up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. This is going to seem like a bit of an odd question, I guess, but it's just something that I've experienced myself, so that's why I'm asking it, just to see your take, I guess. After having like all of these experiences and like I would say addiction feels like a very human, like base level experience. Like it's very focused like within the physical body, as opposed to yeah, it's almost like in a way like a somatic practice, if that makes sense. Like you're very much manipulating the physical. Um and now having all of these experiences and everything, like how do I put this? Okay, I'm gonna explain my
Yes,
experience and
please.
see if this
I love
resonates. The more that I've gotten into this, and the more that I've had these experiences that, yeah, like do blow my reality open. Um, my friend described it as kind of feeling like a balloon on a string, like loosely tethered to the body, and that is something that I felt more and more, and like it is something that I've almost come to struggle to, that I have to accept that I still have to be in this body currently, but I don't feel necessarily like a human, and like it's been a very interesting experience. I mean, part of this is I suspect I'm autistic, so I think that is another level of feeling distance from humanity around me. But the more that I've like deepened this spiritual practice, um yeah, it's just like existence in this physical reality has become less important, and like I'm kind of eagerly awaiting like where to next kind of thing. And I don't know if that's a similar experience that you've experienced, because like in my mind, like coming out of addiction and moving into such a deeply spiritual practice, like that is sort of the same kind of path in terms of going from very, very physical existence to much less so. So I was just curious, like if you have any feelings on that, I guess.
Yeah, I have a lot of feelings on that. It's a huge part of my work. And it's also a place that I can bring in like the feminine and the goddess, because to me, it's very directly connected. So yes, yeah. So as I went through this process of kind of integrating the fact that I've had all these really intense experiences, and that, I think that part of the reason that I'm able to have out of body experiences is that I never felt very safe in my body as a human. And not that, I mean, everybody has trauma. I believe that everybody has capital T trauma. And, I don't even know if there's a really like there's varying degrees of trauma, right? But it's hard to be a human on the planet. It's very, very hard. And I had one of my earliest memories was just dissociating. Like I just stepped like halfway out of my body. And I was like, that place is not safe. The body, not a safe place to be. And so I think a lot of people have that experience who, there does seem to be a connection between like childhood trauma and experiencers. People have these experiences that that kind of dissociation makes it easier to do that. So um, I I understand that. I understand that. And then having these experiences where I was basically told that I am not from here. I don't come here very often. I came here for this specific time on the planet to do this specific work. Um, yeah, there's a real disconnect from the body there, a disconnect from this life, a disconnect from like identifying with the human self. And that's when the goddess arrived. And by the goddess, I mean life herself, the earth herself. The myth that I work with around this is Inanna and Ereshkigal. like the Inanna, queen of heaven and earth, Ereshkigal, queen of the underworld, who holds like the feeling body, basically holds our grief and our rage and all of these things. And so through the process of the goddess arriving and basically like pulling me down, she's like, you know, the earth is like, you're here. You're here in your body. You belong to this place. And I consciously chose, you know, I said, all right, I belong to this place. And I'm going to stop trying to get away from it. I'm going to stop trying to get away from the planet or get away from the body or deny the body. In fact, I'm going to center the body, like center the body as the most important thing, that the body has all of this intelligence that we are disconnected from. And a huge part of that process was grief. So when my relationship ended with this guy that that we just were so in love, and it was almost the thing, and it just wasn't quite the thing, and it was really heartbreaking. I went through this very, very, very deep grief, and it was by going into the grief, like into the full human experience of being a human on the planet, the messiness, the difficulty, the somatic, like you say, like the sensation of what it's like to be in a body and feel these hard things, opened a completely new portal and a new dimension of reality. And now it's my grounded self, like that. It is my body. It is this experience, my feet on the ground, being on this planet, being on this earth, and in total devotion to her, like in total devotion to the planet and her creatures and and all of that, that I felt this integration happen. So now I can, I have access to these other worlds. I have access to these other places, and I have access to this experience of being alive. And I think that's part of why I came here. I want to experience everything really deeply. And so it has become like a cornerstone of my work, that instead of, I know exactly what you're talking about, like this balloon that's very lightly tethered to the body. And I don't think that I really do think this is a very individual journey, and our souls want us to do different things. My soul really, really wanted me to feel all the feelings. I'm going to feel my feelings now. The ETs told me I'm going to feel my feelings. It's like, okay. And then the goddess is just like, yeah, pulls me down. And
Yeah, the Inanna's descent, like I come from like a Greek and Roman history background, so like Persephone's how I kind of connected to that.
mm-hmm.
And just before I listened to your book, like I get a lot of like synchronicity from media, and
Mm-hmm.
like 4 different podcasts, like in the 2 weeks leading up to me listening to your audiobook, were all about Persephone and the descent.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really good, I really like the way you said that about like that descent is like descent into grounding, because I find like in new age circles they tend to take it as like the quote unquote dark feminine and tie that explicitly to just sexuality, which I've never really quite connected with in that regard. And it makes a lot more sense to me the way that you've put it there, because yeah, it definitely is more of a rooting into the ground kind of thing. I had kind of a loosely similar experience where, like, when things were really kicking off for me in this, like, it seems to come in cycles. Like, I'll have like these really weird cluster of experiences really, really fast, and then it'll be like nothing for a while, or like very minimal. And so like in September it was like it kicking up again, and like my mental health was tanking, and that they don't usually coincide. Like usually my mental health tanks and then I come out of it and then I have like more weird experiences. But like during that, like I really connected with Pan, which was interesting for me, because like I'm sure you've probably seen it in different spaces of like Pan's like the it thing right now, like in terms of like Penny Royal and Hellier and stuff like that. And so initially I was very like on the edge. I was like, oh, like this is just my mind like playing tricks on me a little bit, of like connecting this experience to this thing that I'm seeing in the media, like and it was just it but it was kind of that experience of like rooting back into nature and the earth. And like for me, I find a lot of this stuff tends to be linked to the earth itself. Like there's a big focus on like ETs and like like you said, like starseed type stuff. but like I find people don't go the opposite way of like connecting with the earth and the spirit of the earth and like grounding into the earth as like a living animate being. And for me, like Pan was that sort of grounding of getting like very much into nature and very focused on just the natural world around me and having just weird experiences with like animals and with just nature in general. And like the spirit of like place, like I live in Alberta, Canada. Um, the spirit of place, like especially in like central Alberta, like I've talked a little bit about that in other episodes of just like certain areas of Alberta almost feel like spiritually dead in a way. Like they're just not very spooky, I guess is the best way to put it. And then like you go to other parts and you're like, whoa, like there's something here. And I was really starting to kind of tune into that with Pan. Um, and then it sort of tied like you know, it was winter, I didn't have a car, I couldn't go out very much. And like the spaces that I could get were not very like wild. And then that's when I kind of found, you know, the Persephone myth again, which I'd never really paid much attention to when I was in school. And then because everybody was focusing on it, so I was like, all right, fine, I'll listen to it a little bit. But yeah, like I said, like I just didn't connect to it. And this is like just this conversation is making me kind of be like, oh, like that's that's where that came from, kind of thing. That's where it should have gone. And I never really connected the dots. I was just like, okay, that's nice, like cool. Like I'm glad people are connecting to their deep feminine sexuality or whatever it is that they're doing. And then just kind of moved on. But like looking back, like in retrospect, yeah, I can definitely see that deeper grounding connection, which is really cool. So you said like you incorporate that now into like sessions kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's the you know, through a process, right? Like I didn't just arrive, I wasn't like, okay, now I've got all this information and I'm gonna like teach it and help people. And that was like, it was like pulling teeth. It was again this kind of pressure from the beings to talk about this stuff and to help people through it because people had helped me through it, you know. And so over time, um, just getting information about how to basically how to help people cross this threshold from kind of consensus reality uh, to this very enchanted landscape, but do it through the medium of the physical body so that there isn't, you know, to me, it's like um, having an experience, having a mystical experience or having a psychedelic experience, as I'm sure that you know, if it's not integrated in some way, all the messages just kind of float away eventually, you know, and it's the deep integration that changes our lives with this stuff. So yeah, it includes all of the like out of body stuff, all the mystical experience stuff, all of that, but it's trauma informed and it is body centered and starts with like this idea of, you know, kind of like when the 4-Hooer-1 walked through my bedroom wall and blew up my reality. And I was like, I need to get back in my body. And they were annoyed with me, which is like funny now. But at the time I was like, geez, they were like, you really need to ask better questions, you know? And I was like, I'm a little overwhelmed at the moment, you know? So there's all, it's like, there often seems to be these things where we get these really intense messages we get these downloads, you know, that are really big that kind of skip over the fact that I had to get up and go to work that day, or the fact that I've got to like, that I feel really alone and scared and I don't have anybody to talk to about this stuff. And like people who've had near death experiences talk about this a lot, like this amazing experience where they visit the other side and they're bathed in this love. And then they decide to come back and they're sort of like shoved into this very, you know, limited feeling physical body. And then they have to go on with their life and pay their taxes and like do the shit that we have to do as humans. And so a lot of my work is about like, let's not deny, let's not push away the humanness. Let's not push away the earth, the body. But actually, as we turn towards that and open into that realm and that dimension, it becomes like a portal into another reality in itself. I just think we're so disconnected from the body that we've forgotten that it's this space of like intelligence and, um, you know, so I'm trained in somatics work. I am trained in hypnotherapy, and past life regression, between life regression, things like that. And it's all through like the somatics piece. Just acknowledging the somatics piece is kind of the center of the work. Like, we're going to do this really slowly. We're not going to blow open any doors. We're not going to re-traumatize anything. We're centering the most vulnerable part. We're going slow so that this can be integrated into the physical body. And actually, that was one of the messages when I had this period after the first encounter with the four who are one, where these colored spheres began visiting me in dreams, and they would like take me places and teach me things. And I call it alien school, which I may have stolen from Jessa Reed. I'm not sure. I can't remember if I thought of that, if I called it that before I heard her say the words alien school, but that's what I called it. And one of the things that they told me in alien school was that if you're trying to cross into a new paradigm, all of the bodies have to go together, and all of the bodies have to be in sort of close resonance. So, and the physical body is the densest and the slowest, and you're actually not going anywhere without it. So as we are trying to cross into a new paradigm, if the body doesn't feel safe, it will just put a stop, like a break. And the rest of the emotional, physical, mental, etheric, like causal bodies, like everything may want to just astral, like may want to go and have this mission. If the body's not on board, you're not going. And
That's
so
one thing that I've noticed, like in New Age spheres, is all of this talk about like ascension and 5D and that stuff, and it really forgets the body. Like there is a focus of the body, somatically and like healing, but only in the sense of what I found anyway, only in the sense of like healing trauma to permit that ascension. But then like the
right.
body is forgotten about for that ascension. And it's like, okay, like you're not just gonna like zip out of the flesh suit and like leave it crumpled on your bedroom floor like your laundry. Like that's not how this works.
Right.
And it was funny because like as you were saying all that, like literally as you were saying enchantment, I was writing re-enchantment because I wanted to mention that to you. And I was like, oh yes, okay, this is good. This is good. Because yeah, that is one thing that I've been thinking about, like in terms of my own business and work, like in the last 6 weeks or so, like I've really shifted and realized like where my business has to go. I don't even like calling it a business because like I don't, if I could thrive without money, I would. But like this practice that I'm developing of like helping people realize the way that like the bodies around us mirror each other. And so like most of my work is focused on like people and animals. And so people working with their animals to heal both their animals and themselves, and like using their pets in their life as a mirror to realize like where those issues still lie within themselves that they maybe aren't acknowledging. And like what I've found with a lot of this stuff and a lot of these experiences, I don't want to say that no one's experience is not genuine, but like as you already are kind of skeptical of the new age sphere of things. Like I do feel there is a definite like this is a hot topic and people are making a business out of it versus like the authentic, very real experiences of people that want to share these things with other people. And it's I personally, not that I'm going to be like, oh well, that person's faking or not, but it's just in the way that people are talking and sharing about it. If they're dropping a buzzword every couple sentences that lines up with the algorithm, like it gives me a little cause for doubt, I guess is the best way to say it. But what I've noticed is like with people who are very genuine and having these experiences and sharing them with other people, and other people are realizing they're having these experiences too. Like what I've noticed is, yeah, like this shift of paradigm towards like a re-enchantment with the earth, and like a shifting towards realizing, I guess, like the sickness at all levels of society and being that we're experiencing right now, and that it doesn't have to be that way. And it could be a different way, and it kind of needs to hurry up and be a different way if we're going to do anything about it. And it really like, it just is the societal like hero's journey kind of thing that I feel like we're witnessing right now of like, can we get our shit together and collectively move our bodies in the way that we need to actually do something about it? Or are we going to keep focusing on the things that move really fast, like you said, and like try and leave our bodies behind when that's just not a not a feasible reality for us to inhabit as humans. You know? Like it's almost like we're being faced with a choice of like, are we going to continue being human or like give that up and like see what's next and try again kind of thing. Um, and I was about to ask you if that was what you felt also, but then you said the shift of paradigm, and I'm like, okay, yeah, no, never mind. You, it's there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I really resonate with all of that. It's there is I mean, and that idea of like ascension or ascending away from the body is, was going on strong in like 2000 when I first engaged with the internet. Like that's what all of, a lot of new age stuff was about. Um and I think we are learning as a collective though, because uh I'm 44, so I'm like a zennial, and I see like late Gen Xers, early millennials, like have gone through this process of like, okay, I'm going to ascend away from the body, I'm going to, all this spiritual stuff, and kind of deny the body, think happy thoughts and good things will happen to you, and if they don't, it's not because like trauma fucking exists and the world's insane, it's actually your fault because you weren't thinking happy enough thoughts, and like all of that kind of toxic positivity. I do see that there's a collective of us, because I was part of that 100%, and I do see that there's a collective of us that is learning. We're learning. We're learning like, oh, I don't know, let's say that the human experience, embodying the human experience, is a small part of our ultimate experience, and that the soul is this kind of endless long self that goes on in both directions, and that we're having this experience right now. What a sin to ascend out of it. Like that's where we always are. Let's be here while we're here. Let's get, like, as one of my previous teachers used to say, like, let's get muddy and bloody, like down in the dirt, and be here for the mess, and like not try to get away from it. And also really acknowledging that it's hard to make that call, because what it required for me anyway was the definite like necessity to accept that suffering exists, and that trauma exists, and that there's like a real, unfairness that's happening on the planet, and that, like you were saying, like deconstructing from all of these systems that we made up. And I'm not like, I try really hard and try to be really careful about saying like they did this to us. Like I will push back against systems, but never against people, because any one of us at any time could do shitty things, and we all have, in this life or others. That's my belief system. So I don't like to push against the people, but I do push against the systems. And I think that there's a lot of different paradigms. I think there's a lot of realities blooming on the planet right now that are all real. And the one that I want to be connected with and put all of my energy and work into is the one where we remember that we belong to this fucking paradise planet that is rare. Even in the billions of galaxies, this place is special, rare. The 401 told me this is the crown jewel. That's what they call her. She's the crown jewel, the crown jewel, the crown jewel. Like, this is, to me, there's not enough time here. And I say that knowing that I've been in hell realms on this planet. I've gone through, I love the story of Persephone as well. She was dragged to the underworld, right? And Nana went on purpose, which is another reason I use that myth, because when I work with clients, that's what they're doing. They're like, all right, I really don't want to go down there. Like, I really don't want to feel these feelings. I don't want to have this grief. I don't want to have these somatic sensations and, all this stuff that has been both personally and collectively shoved into the underworld. I don't want to go down there, but I'm going to. And that's why I love the myth of Inanna, because because everybody told her in the myth of Inanna, don't go. Like, don't go. You have all the things. Don't go down there. And she's like, no, I'm going to go. And she said, I'm going to go witness the funeral rites instead. And little did she know what she was in for. There's no witnessing down in the underworld. You're in it. You feel it. You have to go through all the things. But and I also really love what you said about this collective hero's journey, because as each of us go through our journeys, go through Inanna's descent or the hero's journey, and and enter back into this, as you said, this re-enchanted landscape where it's like, oh shit, this is what it means to be human. It does include going out of body. It does include contact with ETs. It includes contact with spirits of place, as you said. It's this very rich, alive landscape that we've just kind of forgotten. And as each of us individually have been doing that for, in this particular like iteration of our Western world or whatever, seemingly for the past like 20, 30 years, now I think we're witnessing the collective going through it. And I think that's why things are so like batshit bananas right now, because part of going into this journey is going into the underworld. And when you go into the underworld, everything falls apart. There has to be a death so that there can be a birth. And that's terrifying. And I'm not skipping over that quickly. It's not like, well, yeah, that's what's got to have war, got to have like horror. I don't make light of it at all. And also, like, I think you're right. I think we are collectively now on this journey that will likely get messier and harder before it gets easy, because that's what this path does. It like deconstructs you, pulls you apart, tears you limb from limb, and then you emerge with wisdom, treasure, medicine for the community. And it's not a journey for the faint of heart. And we're doing it as a collective. And it's what a wild time to be on this planet.
Yeah, it certainly is a wild, wild time is like such an understatement. It's so true.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it really, yeah, I have so many thoughts about everything, and I'm just like trying to corral everything together. I guess the one thing I did write a note on here, when you were talking about like toxic positivity sort of vibes of like, oh, everything's love and light, and like if you're not there, like it's because you're not focusing on the right things. How do you find that mentality compares to like what the 4 who are one told you about like the information packets in the honeycomb, and like your attention has to be curated? Like how do you conceptualize the difference there? Because like I find it's very easy. I think most of us who are in this know like what you give attention to is what gets life, basically. But like how do you like reconcile those two differences? Like how do you not fall into toxic positivity yourself with knowing that there's secret little honeycombs behind everything that you need to manipulate?
That is such an excellent question. And that is something that I've been working with and struggling with for the last couple of years, because when I reclaimed the emotional body, when I went into the underworld, when I decided, you know what, like I'm going to be human and I'm going to be here and it's going to be messy and there's no toxic positivity allowed, and I'm going to align with the suffering part over anything. Which gave me tremendous compassion. That's what arrived when I settled into my humanness, was this enormous compassion. I remember, I have a lot to say about this, but I'll try to. I remember I was doing a meditation and I was kind of going down and in and meeting with this kind of goddess crone figure in this meditation. And when I went down and I had this kind of vision emerged in front of me, and she's sitting on this velvet black throne. And it was the same kind of void space that I had visited when I had the first experience. And it was this velvet black throne. And she was like laughing, and she was wry and funny. And, when you meet crone women, you just meet like these women, they're just, and you're like, oh, I get it. Okay. I know what that word means. I know what we're talking about. And she was that. She was just, but she was joyful as well. And she was like incredibly grounded. And I asked her, how are you that way when so much suffering exists on the planet? And she leaned back and like lifted her arms to reveal the throne. And she said, I sit on a throne of suffering. And I didn't know exactly what that meant, but I was like, holy shit, that's powerful. But what I came to understand is that we're not getting out of it. A lot, and even spiritual teachers, in like Buddhism and other places, people who have had an experience of being enlightened say we don't go anywhere. We don't get out of it. My precious teacher says it hurts more and bothers you less. Like we begin to be able to hold the paradox of this is the condition on this planet, is that there is suffering. And I can ease my own suffering and others' suffering by directing my attention in different ways, focusing on different things, but never abandoning the truth of suffering on the planet. And so another thing that the Four Who Are One told me is that part of what I'm doing here is to learn to move through evolution through suffering, from evolution through suffering to evolution through joy and creativity. And that's another way that you're asking this question, like, how do we move, how do we reconcile these things? And what I'm learning is that we, like, even as we're trying to move out of a paradigm of evolution through suffering works. And it's not bad or less than. Like, talk to an addict. Evolution, if they survive it and they become useful in the world and integrate their experiences and then try to help other people, that's evolution through suffering. They went into deep suffering. There was just horrible things happen. So many different people have this experience in so many different ways, but deep suffering, bad things happen, and it gets bad enough that somebody decides to do something different. And they go through this struggle, and this like alchemy happens down in the dark, and that's evolution through suffering, and it's really important. Evolution through joy is a different thing, pointing my attention towards more of what I want to see in the world, but never abandoning the fact that this is the condition on this planet. So anyway, that was a long answer, but I hope it was a great question, and it helps me to talk about it. Yeah.
I really appreciate it because like I wouldn't say that I'm a fairly optimistic person, I guess. And like that's one thing, even when I was like really in the weeds of suffering, like just kept trucking along kind of thing and kept hoping that eventually something would change, and eventually something did. And yeah, I find in a lot of like the more pop new age type stuff, like there's not really that space for grief. And like I've now had to come to realize like I have a fair bit of grief that I've never really acknowledged, simply because it's not, traditional grief. It's not that someone died, it's that someone is no longer the person that I knew as a child, and they never will be, and unless they choose that path, and there's no indicator that they're going to choose that path. And like having to sit with that loss of a person when that person's still in front of you, and I guess also like the grief too of seeing that potential for like they could evolve through this suffering and come out the other side, and you could see the potential of like what they could be on the other side of that. And again, like at this moment they aren't choosing that route, and so like in protection of my own joy, I guess, like I have to take that distance and grieve that that aspect of that loss of like potential, I guess is the best way to put it. And like that's one thing that I've started realizing is there's not really in the really like pop new age spaces, there's not really that acknowledgement of like those levels of grief, and especially in like modern society, I find like people don't really give the space for that sort of grief. And like I really like how you define it between evolution between suffering and evolution between joy, because like they're two sides of the same coin. We do need them, in different aspects. Because I don't think like if you can't figure out how to alchemize that suffering, you're not going to be able to necessarily move towards evolving through joy, like you said. And it's a really good to hear it laid out like that, because like as I'm listening, I'm like thinking in my head of like, okay, like I do tend towards a little bit the toxic positivity, just because like I'm a more optimistic person, so I'm just like, whatever, it'll get better, like it's fine. But it is like stopping and like grounding in that grief. And it's interesting what you said about her sitting on the throne of suffering, because like just the act of like sitting in that suffering, I think is something, we're always looking for the way out, rather than sitting down and being like, okay, shit's bad. Like, let's just like sit and acknowledge that for a minute and like feel into that versus looking for the next way out of it. And I really just love like the evolution of joy, evolution of suffering, like that dichotomy, not even dichotomy, I guess, like it's more hand in hand, like they work together. Um, it's just a very beautiful metaphor that I think we need more of in life, because most people, I don't think, really see it as a both and option, more of a either or kind of thing. And I think we could definitely use a little bit more space for just sitting with what we're going through as a society collectively, because there's so much push to change things, which, like, yes, we should change things, but also like maybe we need to sit and acknowledge why we keep creating these situations for ourselves.
100%. Yeah, I completely agree. And um, I call it touching bottom. Like until we've touched bottom, we can't like push off and do the next thing, And I do think it's the missing piece. I think that being with those, going through grief is an alchemy. It's an alchemical process, and we're different on the other side. And that's, yeah. And the grief that you're talking about, like I completely understand like this idea. There's so many people who we just kind of push away our own grief and say, well, I mean, mine was a relationship that didn't work out the way I thought the way that I wanted it. Nobody died. People go into grief over the loss of a pet. They go into grief over the loss of a job. They go into grief over the loss of a relationship. The grief that you described, that this person, that loss, this person is not who I expected them to be. Like these are all valid forms of grief. Like it's all valid. It's all valid. And I think that we've pushed that away as well and said only certain kind of griefs count. There's a beautiful book that I recommend all the time called The Wild Edge of Sorrow by Francis Weller. And he talks about the 5 gateways of grief. And they are, one of them is not receiving the things that we expected to receive. These are real griefs. And so, yeah, I think
that's such a great, like societal and generational grief right now of not, like the dream of home ownership, for example, like that is unattainable at this point in time. And like systems are being set up to make sure that that's not attainable. my tinfoil hat is firmly on.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I hear you.
But it's just like societally and generationally, like, and I think, like, I feel like Gen Z has encapsulated such a perfect response to this, of like this surrealist sort of, like, if you just like look at their sense of humor, like the way that they respond to things, of just like out of pocket sort of weird responses to things, of just like, because I feel like Gen Z at least maybe is much different from millennials in the fact that they weren't really fed that dream necessarily of like, go to work a 40-hour job and have a family and have a house and all this like stuff that we've always aspired to. Whereas Gen Z, like, they came in the thick of it, and their parents are basically like, well, you're fucked. Like, and they kind of have this blank canvas to work off of. And I mean, I don't, like, maybe I need to talk to more Gen Z, but I don't feel that they necessarily have the grief in the same acute way that like millennials and maybe even Gen X to some extent have, that like the world of our parents is gone. Like we are not going to necessarily be able to have that, be it, the powers that be, quote unquote, or societal collapse in some way. Cause like my degree is in archaeology and Greek and Roman studies. And I always say this, like, we're literally watching the Bronze Age collapse in real time. And it used to cause me such overwhelming grief. Like I'd be on my way to work and I'd have to pull over because I was just sobbing. And I'm like, why am I going to work when like everything's dying? Like, why am I not out living this? And now, like, part of me, and maybe this is in alignment with Pan, but part of me is kind of doing this little jig, like, oh, here it comes, guys. Like it's like, climbing up the hill on the roller coaster and pausing at the top, and you can see the drop coming. And it's like, it is terrifying. Like, I mean, this isn't to discount like the amount of suffering that's going to happen and death. And I mean, it's already happening. But it is exciting to see the opportunity coming of, if we can wipe the slate clean, like the opportunity for what we can build from that. But at the same time, like there is like a collective grief that we need to process, that like this there's not that level, like we can't achieve what we were. Sorry, there's just random banging happened in my house. I don't know if you could hear that, but
I did hear.
um we can't really achieve what we were told we could, and there's such a huge level of sorrow that we have to give up on that to some extent, but also at the same time, like there's so much opportunity to build something new that we can hang on to, and like that path isn't forged yet, so like we don't even know what it's going to look like. But for myself, like it's come in the form of, maybe land would be accessible, like maybe off-gridding would be accessible, maybe building a collective community of people who want to live together and like work in harmony rather than being on an individual level. Like maybe that's a possibility now. Which I guess comes back to that suffering and joy thing of like that distinct suffering and finding the joy that can come from that loss. Like with that loss comes the space for something new.
Mm.
But like societally, I don't think we've fully grieved yet the loss of, the peak of the baby boomer generation in this society and what it was at one point and what it's probably not ever going to be again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you said so much there, and I just completely agree. Um yeah, the idea of, we're going to have to find a new way, and the idea of doing something communally or doing off grid makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, that's how I live, and the only reason I can live this way is because my parents went first, because I live on the land that I grew up on, and so they did it, and now I can do it. And we've been disconnected from our generational like abundance as well. And so I have this tremendous privilege and this tremendous wealth just by having a place that is my inheritance, basically, like this, not in a monetary way, but like this is what they did and I get to benefit from that. So this idea that someone has to go first is definitely a huge idea. And this was the spark that was happening in like the 60s and 70s with my parents' generation. They were rejecting war. They were rejecting the way of the world, and a few people went out and did it and kind of planted a seed and pollinated the world with that particular frequency. And also, like, we have an understanding of attachment systems, trauma, the emotional body that they had no idea about. They did not have the tools to have these commune spaces. Like most communes didn't work out because of interpersonal stuff, because people, we didn't have all these tools. Now we have all these tools. We can do the work, right? Like we can do the work on ourselves so that we can be mature and come in and space hold in these places and maybe create something different from a place of, again, like deep grounded maturity. And I think that there's like, I love that there's this, that it's arising again, this idea of like going off grid, being with the land, with the foundation of us learning how to human in a totally different way. And I also really love what you said about I think that this is true. So, don't somebody look it up or something, but that the word crisis in Japanese means dangerous opportunity. And it's both, right? Like it's dangerous and it's an opportunity. And I feel like that's what you're talking about, as we're kind of watching the potential fall happen, which civilizations have seen over and over and over again. We've fallen. Humans have fallen. These civilizations have so many times. We're watching it approach, perhaps, right? And it's a dangerous opportunity. It's very, very dangerous. And it's an opportunity for something new. And as you were saying, like the new thing isn't even created yet. We have not created it. And I started this, I'm just now starting this group program called the Bridge Collective Teachings. And the Bridge Collective is about this. It's about like, okay, we all see this, right? And we all, those of us who have the privilege, the fortune and leisure to do something, like to create something instead of just survival mode, which a lot of people just absolutely are in survival mode. But those of us who kind of have some footing and might be able to be helpful, Like, how can we, I feel like there's a collective of us that is walking, and with each step, we're creating the bridge into the new thing. And so this group teaching is like, how do we do that? How do we do that together? And how do we do that deeply connected to, again, grief, suffering, the physical body, and not denying the fact that we are also incredibly powerful beings. Like, we have forgotten how powerful we are. Our reality does shift based on where we place our attention and the quality of our attention. And so it's this synthesis of all of these things. Can we walk across this threshold, creating it as we go, minimizing suffering as much? Like, I'm not somebody, I don't want to see a collapse. I really want to see an alchemy happen. I know that there's going to be suffering, but I understand the opportunity part of something dissolving and coming into something new, like like what happens in the underworld. I would like for it to be as gentle as possible, and for as few people as possible to suffer. But we got to create the new thing too. And what are we going to create? So, oh gosh, like, I just feel it all in my body. It's like, it's so exciting. It's so big. It's so hard. Um, And I also think that we're here for it. Like, those of us who have the capacity and have the privilege are here for it. And I believe in us. Like, I believe in humans. Actually, I'm a tremendous optimist, and I love humans despite
Despite everything.
despite, like, I can see what's happening. I know, but I really do have faith in us. So
Yeah, I really like what you said about like your parents went first kind of thing, but they didn't do it like their generation, like the amount of trauma that was unprocessed was the reason for a lot of these things failing. And I 100% agree. I think like the healed state that a lot of us are working from now, or healing state, I should say. I don't think you ever really get 100%. Is it, like, that's great. And like one thing that I've noticed that we probably will need to resolve sooner than later is like while we are doing a lot of this healing, it's on such an individual basis, and it's not necessarily community focused, because a lot of it, and not to discount anyone, because like I've definitely done this myself, but a lot of it does also come with the element of, there is like a cutting out of people who, maybe aren't matching your healing state. Like there's such a disconnect between yourself and these other folks that you just, if you want to maintain your growth, like you can't have continuous interaction with these people. And what I've noticed, like just like in spaces that I've been in, that tend towards like left of center politics, is the ability to resolve conflict is almost a skill that we've lost in some aspects, because rather than resolve the conflict, it's cut them out and move on, which to some extent I understand, because like I said, I've done it myself. But also, like, if you're to live in, like, say, an off-grid community, like that's like those people are integral for your survival. Like it's one thing that I've seen is that like a lot of the people who started off gridding during COVID have gone back to living in the city because it's so hard. And it's like, well, of course it's hard. You're living with 1 to 2 people, maybe more if you've got kids. And like, that's not how people used to do it. Like, even, the settlers who came, they weren't living in a one-off settlement. Like, they had people around them to support. And like, you need to learn that conflict resolution to be able to live in that community. Like, you can't just cut somebody off, because that could mean death for them, death for you. Like, it's a very real thing of like, okay, how do you learn how to resolve conflict? And that's something I've been thinking about lately, because I do want to create like an online community that is founded on conflict resolution, and that everybody is welcome, but like we need to learn how to resolve these conflicts. And then the second part of that too is, one thing that I've noticed is like people will tend towards taking accountability for themselves in some aspect, but like being accountable to a community as well. Like I've seen people just, in like, I'm speaking very generally here, like, because like, there's so many experiences, but and this is for myself as well. Like, I'm not excluding myself from this by any means, but not remaining like accountable to the community. And if things for whatever reason become too taxing for you, or that you don't necessarily align with that community, not taking the accountability personally, and the responsibility of like, oh, okay, you know what, I am letting down the group here, let me shift and make this work. And so I think like before we make these huge shifts, and which hopefully I agree with you, hopefully it is a gentle shift. Um, those are like the next steps. Like we've started the healing work and a lot of us have understood like how to heal. But the next step is now like, okay, how do you heal in community? How do you heal with a community? And how do you maintain your responsibility to that community in spite of the bumps that are eventually going to come? Because like that's going to, I think for our generation, yeah, okay, we might start communes, but that's going to be the next bump of like how do you fix that and maintain this. And I've just noticed that in the last little while like the like teamwork is not like we've become so hyper individualized that like that's kind of the next struggle of like how do we resolve this because we don't really know how to live in communities anymore. And I'm seeing it just in day-to-day life with my generation and younger people of like people don't know how to socialize, don't know how to be friends anymore, don't know how to like maintain friendships. And I don't know if that's just a post-COVID thing or if it's, you know, maybe the social media aspect of like, you know, you feel connected to people because you have them on Facebook, but like how often have you talked to them? How often have you like hung out with them? Like I've got people who apparently still consider me their friends just based on some of the invites and stuff I've received, but like people who haven't talked, like we haven't seen each other in person for like 3 years. And it's like there's no reason for that except for the fact that like they don't feel the disconnect because like we're connected on social media, therefore we're connected. But you know, that connection in real life doesn't exist anymore. So it'll be interesting to see how we shift to now deal with this new issue. Because I think that's something, you know, we are healing, like I said, like it's an action. It's not ever like a state that you get to. But then it's like, okay, like what's next? Because it's like we have so much trauma built up in ourselves and it's resonated into our communities and society of like, okay, now that's like the next step is like this collective healing of how we resolve these issues that have cropped up as like a product of all the individual trauma.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah. You're exactly right. I think that is the question, is how to, realizing like once we kind of do the work, right, and get our nervous system stabilized and go through some healing process and get some frameworks that a lot of us have had to do on our own. Like therapy is great. I've been in therapy. It's wonderful. I love therapy. And also there was a lot of time that I couldn't afford it or that it wasn't exactly teaching, like it wasn't hitting the thing. We've had to do a lot of self-discovery and learn how to go into these spaces on our own. And as we do that, yeah, the next question becomes like, okay, I feel pretty good, solid, secure. Now, how do I form a secure attachment with another person, knowing how fraught it is, right? Like exactly what you're saying. And so, yeah, I completely agree with that. It's gonna be wild and interesting. And also there are people doing this work. There are people doing the work of like trying to figure out how this is gonna, what this is gonna look like. It's one reason that I moved back to the land that I grew up on is because, and I really consciously thought to myself, this is a village of three. This is my parents, they live across the valley, and me, and we are a village of three. And this is my parents, and they're lovely people, and we get along really well. But they're my parents. Like there is not conflict. Like there's stuff comes up. And so how do we handle this? How do we have conflict resolution? How do we like determine, we each have our individual lives, but also there's a collective space that we're serving. How do we determine the rules around that? And it's possible. I think it's a deeply primordial human thing to know how to live in community with each other. And we've forgotten it, but we can remember how to do it. We can remember how to do it. So, yeah, I feel like I'm really enjoying this conversation, and I feel like I could talk to you. I would love to have you on my podcast and talk to you.
That'd be
And
so cool. I just want to say I heard you mention your bridge collective thing, and I didn't really necessarily grasp what it was on your podcast, and then you just described it now, and like just thank you. I'm so happy that someone is doing work like that. Because thank you so much, Robin, for joining us. I really appreciate it. It was such a lovely discussion. Can you just let everybody know where to find you and what sort of offerings you have on the table?
oh, thank you so much for that opportunity. Yeah, so the book that I wrote is called Earth: A Love Story. I have a podcast by the same name, Earth: A Love Story, where you can listen to me read the book. The first 15 episodes are the podcast. I will say that I'm putting it behind a paywall at some point because girls got to eat, but right now it's free, it's available. My coaching and session and Bridge Collective, all of that can be found at my website, honeyheart.org. So one word, honeyheart.org. And the waiting list for the Bridge Collective is open right now. And then I think official registration I'm going to do on the first new moon in May, whenever that is. So,
Cool.
But yeah, I love to hear people's stories too. So anybody who just wants to reach out and connect, even without any kind of work or sessions or anything, I always encourage that. And I've had a blast on your podcast. Thank you again to Cas Bullis. Thank you to Morgan Jenks for our beautiful musical soundscapes. For more information about my work or to book a one-on-one session with me, please visit honeyheart.org.